I'm here in Alabama in February, which is not really the season for pozole. So I'm from New Mexico, and one thing that we always would eat and make, and it would be our Christmas Eve staple, would be pozole. But we were out of town for the holidays, yada yada. It's still kind of dreary outside. I know you can't quite see it, but it's that kind of week that I need to get on it and make my pozole. I do a huge batch. I bag it all in quart bags, which ends up being about 2 big bowls for each of us, and it takes several days to get it together. I don't have a recipe for it. It's really just a method of how I put things together and get it all going. One of my main goals is to have the broth be as rich as possible. Of course, it's going to be flavored with red chili and spices and things, but the actual broth part needs to be rich. It's not something that you taste and like, oh, that's chicken or that's beef. It's just this richness that comes through. And one way that you can tell when your broth is really rich is the amount of collagen or gelatin in it. So I normally start a lot of bones. I get a lot of smoked hocks, because I actually will end up, after I cook all those for at least 24 hours, pull everything out, drain it. That's what I'm wanting. I call that liquid gold. If you put it in the fridge, it's going to be like Jello. And there's a reason for that. And then all those other bits and pieces, for the most part, go in the garbage except all the meat parts. So I pull the meat parts out, and that also goes into my pozole. And again, it's going to take several days. So this has been cooking about 24 hours. Inside here, these are all of my smoked pork hocks. I have my giant turkey drumstick in there, all these yummy meaty bits, and this delicious, gorgeous, cloudy liquid, which I know it doesn't look great right now, but again, it gets strained. All right, so the broth has been poured out. I've separated all the bones and little, kind of bone bits. This is the prize container. This is actually 2 full containers, store-bought containers of ham hocks and 1 turkey drumstick. I would say for your money, the turkey drumstick is probably the best, because that's what gives you all those little bits of meat. And God help the person that try to take this out of the fridge and nibble on it. This is what's gonna make my pozole legendary. All right, so it's day 2. We're making our pozole, and this is probably the most special day to smell red chili cooking in your kitchen. I dare say, I don't know of a better smell. Now I need to get my pozole cooking, and I also need to brown all my meats and get those cooking. And then on the side, I need to roast all my chili pods, remove the seeds and the stems, then boil them with some garlic, then puree them. Then I can start adding all this magical stuff together to create one of the most delicious things in the world to eat. It is my husband's absolute favorite thing that I make. Hang in there with me. Hopefully we can finish this today. You're finally ready for our next step. So I want to make a huge batch of pozole. So I'm going to end up using 2 of my biggest stock pots. So I will put 1 in each. Let me just show you. It just has water and lime in it. I could order it online, but you can always get this at any store in New Mexico. The next thing I'm going to do, this is pork butt. So I am going to probably cube these up a little bit smaller. And then I'm going to probably brown my meat with my onions at the same time. I really think that it flavors the meat a lot better. This together is probably about 4 pounds. So again, I'm going to use, each pot will get 1, and then I'll just kind of go back and forth to make sure the seasoning is good on. So I have a ground beef cooking in here. My onions are underneath. I find it just kind of sweats them a little bit. I'm pulling out my broth that I made the other day, and let me show you this lovely layer of fat. You know I'm going to use that. And watch this. Oh yeah. My voice is jiggling. That's the good stuff. That's the good stuff, because it is loaded with flavor and gelatin, and it's just going to make that pozole so much more awesome. So we're getting about halfway cooked. I did add some salt in there. I typically use about a teaspoon of salt per pound of meat. That's just a general rule of thumb that I kind of follow. I do want to just have some salt in here that it starts to just get more flavorful, but I'm not concerned about this being the perfect saltiness, because when I add it to the broth, I know I'll need a lot of salt. All right, here I have my pozole. I just put in some water and a couple fresh bay leaves. I always use a whole lot of bay leaves. I just love them. And now I'm going to probably turn it on. I'm going to add in that rich gelatinous stock. So I did do a good amount of water just so that it does thin out a little bit. All right, the ground beef and onions are ready. I did add some salt in there. I'm going to keep every ounce of that boiling fat. All right, the ground beef is in there with the pozole on the bottom, some bay leaves, and some water. And now I'm going to reheat the skillet, because this is not a cooking show. I'm using the same skillet. I'm going to brown up my little cubes of pork. Here is my pork, cubed up small bits of pork butt and into more bite-sized type pieces. I'm letting it brown on the bottom. It doesn't want to move now, so I'm not going to push it. starting to move, but I want color on there. So if you have a little bit of color on there, it'll make it that much more tender when it's put into the broth. And the broth is already starting to get hot enough now. It has the ground beef in there, the pozole, and bay leaves. These are New Mexican red chili pods. At one time they were green and then they just become red. I always get the hot ones. I'm gonna take them out, I'm gonna toast them in a pan, and then I'll take out the seeds and the stems, and then I'm gonna boil them with garlic for about a half an hour. I have all the tops and the seeds out along with my gloves. Make sure you're using gloves to do that. And then in this pot, I have some garlic and then the toasted chili. So I just threw them in a skillet, 20, 30, 40 seconds, just to kind of get a little blackened flair to them, because again, it's just adding another layer of color. In my other pots, I have still the stock, a little bit of water, the pozole, I have the ground beef, the pork, and then those yummy little bits of ham hocks. So my chili pods are done boiling with some garlic. I'm gonna add them to the Vitamix with a good amount of water and blend them up. Don't forget, when you are blending it up, this is the first half, you're gonna have to blend it and let the heat escape, and you don't wanna overfill it because it'll blow up. It'll be a huge boiling hot mess. I added a little bit of cumin, and then I always put a good amount of Mexican oregano, not too much. And there really is a difference between regular oregano and Mexican oregano, but this is what helps kind of round out that New Mexican flavor. All right, are you ready? Here we go. Looks just like it did the other day. So the main thing you're gonna watch for the actual pozole, they're not gonna pop like popcorn, but they're gonna get a lot bigger. And then you're just checking for tenderness. Take one out every so often. It shouldn't have any real give to it. It's not, you don't want it to be total mush, but you want it to be fully cooked. And then you're checking for salt. You want to make sure that it is salty enough, that it's not bland. You're going to have the heat. And you also want to make sure you have enough cumin, enough oregano. If you need a little more garlic, you could add it as well. And the last thing, so one thing I did, this is fairly brothy, and I'll tell you why, because I feel like I need to be talking to you. I had it uncovered most of the time. And I have one burner that's definitely hotter than the other burner because it's a lot bigger around. So I noticed that a lot had evaporated, and I was tempted to add more broth, which I always have more broth, but I held it off, and let me tell you why. So after the two were completely done cooking, we ate, the lights came back on by then. Then I could do my favorite trick that I like to do, because imagine it's 8 o'clock at night, you have a huge hot boiling thing of soup. It's gonna take forever to cool. And for food safety reasons, yada, yada, the whole goal is when you get it off the heat, you need to cool it as quickly as possible so that you can safely store it. So one thing that I like to do, I go to the freezer and I get out a quart bag of broth. So I can put that whole, I just open up the Ziploc bag and peel it off because it's frozen solid, and you can easily just unwrap it. Throw the whole thing in there, and it's gonna melt within, I don't know, 10 minutes or so. You can fiddle with it if you want and stir it around. And then the whole soup will be pretty cool within 15 minutes or so. Then taste it. You'll probably need to add another teaspoon-ish. Yeah, probably at least, maybe even more, depending on how much broth was in that bag. Just add a fair amount of salt so that you know that it's balanced out again. And then you can get your awesome little Ziploc bag holders, pour it in there, freeze it again nice and flat so that it's easier to thaw and easier to store in the freezer. So that's something that I also didn't get to show you, because then by that time I forgot when the lights came back on. So as always, I want to encourage you to go Beyond Betty. Until then, we'll see you next time. But I hope you enjoyed this episode of Go Beyond Betty, because I don't know why. I'm gonna have to cut this part out. Oh yeah.